Hannibal crossed the Alps with elephants.
Oh,
Most people know this story in the version where Hannibal, one of history's greatest generals, crossed the Alps with an army that included war elephants. They say only 2 elephants survived the trek, but there's a lot more to the story than that. In fact, Hannibal didn't even make it to Rome. Although his father, Hamilcar Barca, had dreamed of conquering the Eternal City, for Hannibal, his goal was simply to open a second front in the Second Punic War. The challenge first came from the Pyrenees Mountains, which guarded the entrance to Gaul. But Hannibal's army, which according to Livy, numbered around 90,000 men, including foot soldiers and cavalry, plus about 100 elephants, easily overcame the passes through the Pyrenees. The climate became colder and wetter, and the forests began to thin, giving way to large open spaces. This is when the war elephants really started suffering. First of all, the food situation got difficult. Much of what Hannibal's elephants ate would have been green leafy plants, regardless of exactly how many he had when he got to Italy. None of them were still alive by the time he left. So what happened to them? Hannibal won several victories against the Romans in central and southern Italy, but he never laid siege to Rome. Rome was terrified of Hannibal's elephants, and for good reason. He left Italy in 216 BC, having fought many battles against Rome's general. Marcus Terentius Varro, in his daring invasion across the Alps, will continue to be studied for generations to come. By the time Hannibal arrived back in Carthage, his army was reduced to around 8,000 men. Watch another one of my videos, which you can see right here. Please remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified when I post new videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Although Hannibal remained a thorn in the side of the Romans throughout the war, he never again attempted to invade Italy. The war eventually ended in 201 BC with the Treaty of Carthage. Hannibal was forced to give up war elephants forever and most of his navy. Most importantly, he had to pay a massive indemnity to Rome, which utterly bankrupted Carthage. Elephants played a key role in the Carthaginian army, and they were a truly terrifying weapon. Elephants were huge, strong, and fast, able to trample enemy soldiers and pick them up with their tusks and throw them onto their backs or toss them into the air. With their thick skin, elephants were also very hard to kill, capable of enduring many wounds that would fell a human soldier. If a Roman soldier managed to get under an elephant's foot, however, he would be instantly killed, and it seems that some Romans were doing just that. According to Livy, Roman soldiers would throw themselves under the feet of war elephants in order to kill them. Of course, they would have to be willing to die in order to take down one of these enormous beasts. Well, after reaching the Po Valley, Hannibal used his war elephants in several battles against Rome's allies in northern Italy. Hannibal's army lived off the land as they marched, and they engaged in hit-and-run tactics against the Romans. This prevented him from building up large stockpiles of food and other necessary supplies. Without a reliable supply line, Hannibal never had enough provisions to lay siege to a city. Some of the elephants were certainly lost in battle, such as the 20 that were killed during the Battle of the Trebia in 217 BC. But we also know from Polybius that Hannibal sold some of his elephants to local Italian tribes and rulers. For example, he sold 4 pairs of elephants to King Philip of Macedon, used them to great effect in the Battle of Cynocephalae. In 219 BC, during that battle, Philip's elephants captured 2 Roman standards, an eagle and a dragon. So at least these elephants died in battle, doing what elephants do. Other elephants were likely sold to various Italian tribes and chieftains. But there's no evidence that Hannibal ever attempted to recapture them, unlike his cavalry horses. But those weren't available in the higher elevations. Instead, the elephants had to eat tough, dry grasses that barely sustained them. One reason may have been that Hannibal thought it was impossible to control elephants outside of Africa. Many historians believe that elephants captured in Africa can be trained and handled by anyone, but Asian elephants are a different story. Asian elephants are notoriously difficult to train, especially compared to African elephants. Historians think that this is because Asian elephants have smaller ears, larger heads, and more prominent temporal crests. These physical differences are associated with increased brain power and the ability to display a wider range of emotions, including affection, grief, anger, and self-awareness. Self-awareness might lead to an elephant deciding that it doesn't want to work for humans anymore, or at least to stop working for a human that it doesn't like. Either way, Asian elephants are extremely difficult to keep under control. And if Hannibal's elephants were anything like their modern counterparts, he would have known that he couldn't trust them to obey his commands. In other words, it may have been easier for Hannibal to sell his remaining elephants than to risk being crushed by one. Next, the rain came, falling as snow on the peaks around them. And while the elephants could probably walk through the snow, they needed somewhere to shelter from the elements. But the higher they climbed, the fewer trees there were. Finally, the Romans who were pursuing Hannibal, such as Quintus Fabius, Maximus Verrucus, opted to stay at lower elevations. Knowing that the difficulty of the terrain would slow the Carthaginians down and tire out their elephants, there were also reports of Hannibal sending some elephants ahead to ambush any Roman forces that might try to follow him across the mountains. Here, enormous rocks had fallen across the road, apparently so many that Hannibal sent detachments of infantry forward to clear them away. The exact number of elephants that Hannibal brought into battle is unknown. Estimates range from 30 to 100, and it's possible that the upper estimate is correct. Given that Polybius claims 80 elephants accompanied Hannibal into Italy, unfortunately, the sources disagree on how many elephants survived the journey. Livy says that only 2 elephants completed the trek, but Polybius gives a much higher number. According to Polybius, 37 elephants finished the march, but he also said that 15 died of exhaustion and starvation, and 6 fell victim to disease. That means that Hannibal likely still had about 45 elephants left when he reached the plains of northern Italy. It's possible that Livy's number of 2 survivors is correct, but Livy often inflates the number of casualties inflicted on Hannibal's army. These rocks weighed several tons and were too heavy for the men to move. So instead, according to Livy, Hannibal used vinegar. Vinegar contains acetic acid, which reacts with calcium carbonate in limestone and rocks to break them down. So Hannibal may have soaked the rocks in vinegar for several days, gradually dissolving them until they could be moved. After the rocks were cleared, Hannibal's army continued eastward toward the Po Valley in northern Italy. Whatever the case, the bulk of his war elephants made it to the other side. At the time, Rome was bogged down, fighting a brutal war against the Achaean League in Greece by marching through Gaul or France to the Italian peninsula. Hannibal could force the Romans to split their forces between 2 fronts. Even better, if he could get enough elephants into the equation, he could terrorize the Italian countryside and possibly even lay siege to Rome itself. And although he did lose most of his elephants, they weren't all dead by the time he got to the plains of Italy. In today's video, we're going to look at how Hannibal made it over the Alps, what happened to his elephants, and what exactly Rome was so afraid of. It's me. Welcome to my channel, where we bring you new videos every week on ancient warfare and related topics. When Hannibal set out from Spain in 218 BC, his goal wasn't Rome itself. Unfortunately for Hannibal, crossing the Alps would not be easy. From there, Hannibal marched north to Lyon, where he spent the winter of 218 BC. He needed time to rest his troops and prepare his elephants for the real challenge, the Alps. We don't know for sure which route Hannibal took, but he likely crossed the Rhone River near modern Geneva, and then followed the western foothills of the Alps through the Saône Valley. The elevation here is around 300 meters. But once he reached the Little St. Bernard Pass, the elevation rose to around 2,500 meters. As Hannibal's army made their way along the valley, the terrain began to change. The rains and snows continued until the Carthaginians reached the pass, and that is where Hannibal lost most of his elephants. That said, we do know that Hannibal lost most of his elephants. So why didn't Hannibal attempt to recapture his elephants? So Hannibal crossed the Alps with war elephants, and he lost most of them. But how close did he get to Rome? It's actually pretty close. In the end, Hannibal's inability to capture Rome was due to a combination of factors, including the rugged terrain of Italy, the lack of elephants, and perhaps most importantly, the lack of supplies. After spending years in Italy without capturing Rome, Hannibal finally went home. Although Hannibal's campaign into Italy was ultimately a failure, he remains a legendary military leader. If you enjoyed this video, check out my video on how Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, kicked off the Second Punic War.